The city was a beast of rot and rain, and Julian was a parasite in its gut. He knelt before the porcelain god of his dingy, third-floor walk-up, the sour tang of bile clinging to his throat. It wasn't just the pregnancy. It was the scent of a million lives pressing in on him, a discordant symphony of stale grease, damp concrete, and desperate perfume that scraped his unnaturally heightened senses raw. 3 months. 3 months since his world had been torn apart on a night that should have been his beginning. His wedding night. The memory was a shard of glass under his skin, sharp and constant. White silk stained with wine and blood. The shattering of conservatory glass. The screams of guests turning from celebration to terror. And then, the scent. Ozone, ancient pine, and the clean, cold fury of a winter storm. It had filled the hall, silencing everything else. A presence, vast and absolute, had carved through the chaos, its eyes, molten silver in the dim light, finding his. He hadn't been the target. He was supposed to be the prize, the Omega bond that would seal a treaty between his father's pack and the Varden clan. A political pawn in a pretty suit. But the storm had come for the Vardens, and Julian had simply been in the way. He remembered the grip on his arm, a strength that was terrifying and absolute. Being dragged from the carnage. The brutal, desperate fight in the gardens, moonlight glinting on shifting forms. And then the teeth. The searing, world-ending pain as the Alpha's fangs sank into the juncture of his neck and shoulder, claiming him, marking him, rewriting his future in a single, violent act. He retched again, gripping the cold rim of the toilet. The mark on his neck burned with a phantom heat, a permanent link to the monster who destroyed his life and then vanished, leaving Julian to face the consequences alone. His family had disowned him, damaged goods, tainted by a rival Alpha. His intended, Robert Varden, was dead. And Julian, the quiet, scholarly Omega who had only ever wanted a garden and a library, was now pregnant, hunted, and hiding in a human metropolis that was slowly suffocating him. He was utterly, completely alone. He rinsed his mouth, the metallic taste of the city's water doing little to help. His reflection was a stranger's, gaunt, pale, with dark circles bruising the skin beneath his eyes. His hand strayed to the slight, barely there curve of his stomach. A life created in violence and fear, a life that tied him inextricably to the silver-eyed phantom of his nightmares. It was this life, this tiny, fluttering secret, that had changed everything. His initial plan, to find the monster and exact some kind of justice, had curdled into a desperate need to survive, to protect. An instinct he hadn't known he possessed now raged within him, a ferocious, maternal fire that eclipsed even his grief and rage. He had to eat. For the pup, he pulled on a worn hoodie, the fabric a poor shield against the city's sensory assault. Out on the street, the noise was a physical blow. A car horn blared, and he flinched, his heart hammering against his ribs. The smells were worse. Hot dogs from a street vendor, exhaust fumes, the cloying sweetness of a bakery. It all churned in his stomach. He kept his head down, a ghost in the river of oblivious humanity. But he was not oblivious. He was a predator forced to live among sheep, and every nerve was screaming. He could smell the subtle shift in a man's pheromones as he eyed a woman across the street, the faint scent of sickness on an elderly woman shuffling past, the bitter tang of adrenaline from a pickpocket weaving through the crowd. It was too much. He focused on his destination, a small, 24-hour grocery store 3 blocks away. Milk, bread, anything plain. He could feel the bond, a thin, silver thread humming just beneath his consciousness. It was always there, a tether to the Alpha. Most days it was a dull ache, a reminder of his violation. But sometimes, in moments of extreme stress, it pulled taut. A low, primal thrum that whispered of safety, of territory, of mate. He hated it. He hated the weakness it represented, the betrayal of his own body. He was no one's mate. He was a survivor. The grocery store's automatic doors hissed open, and Julian was hit with a wave of refrigerated air and the scent of floor cleaner. It was a small mercy. He moved quickly down the aisles, grabbing a carton of milk and a loaf of bread, his eyes scanning, always scanning. It was a habit he'd developed over the last 3 months, a constant state of low-grade paranoia. His father would not have let the insult of his theft go unanswered. He would be looking for him, not out of concern, but to erase the evidence of his family's shame. Julian was a loose end carrying the air of a hated rival. He was at the checkout, fumbling with the crumpled bills in his pocket, when a new scent cut through the sterile air. It was faint, almost lost beneath the smell of cheap coffee and disinfectant, but it was utterly, terrifyingly familiar. Cedarwood and old leather. The scent of his father's chief enforcer, Marcus. Julian's blood ran cold. His heart seized in his chest, a frantic bird beating against the cage of his ribs. He didn't look up. He forced his hands to remain steady as he paid the cashier, took his plastic bag, and walked out of the store. He didn't run. Running would draw attention. He walked, forcing a calm he didn't feel, his senses screaming, trying to pinpoint the source. The scent was stronger out here, carried on the damp evening breeze. Down the street, half hidden in the shadows of an awning, a figure stood watching the store. Broad-shouldered, with the unmistakable predatory stillness of a wolf in human skin. Marcus. They had found him. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his carefully constructed composure. He turned, melting into the throng of pedestrians, his pace quickening. He couldn't go back to the apartment. They would be watching it. He was exposed, his pathetic illusion of safety shattered. He ducked into an alley, the stench of overflowing dumpsters making him gag. His back hit the cold, wet brick of the wall. Trapped. The pup inside him gave a small, nervous flutter, and a wave of fierce, protective rage washed over him. He would not let them take him. He would not let them harm his child. The silver thread of the bond, the one he so despised, suddenly flared to life, pulling taut with a desperate, agonizing hum. It was a homing beacon, an instinct screaming for help from the one person he feared as much as his pursuers. Alpha. Mate. Danger. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting it, pushing it down. He would rather die than call that monster to him. The alley entrance was suddenly blocked by a shadow. Not Marcus. This figure was taller, leaner, and moved with a liquid grace that spoke of immense, restrained power. The air grew heavy, charged with an invisible energy, and a new scent flooded the narrow space, eclipsing the city's filth. Ozone. Pine. The clean, sharp chill of an oncoming storm. Julian's breath hitched. His knees felt weak. He knew that scent better than his own. It was seared into his DNA, woven into the fabric of his nightmares, and the very essence of the life growing inside him. The man stepped out of the shadows and into the weak glow of a distant street lamp. He was exactly as Julian remembered, impossibly tall, with a face carved from unforgiving granite, all sharp angles and severe lines. His hair was the color of midnight, and his eyes were the same molten silver, glowing with an intensity that seemed to peel back Julian's skin and see the frantic, terrified soul beneath. He wore a simple black coat, but it did nothing to hide the sheer presence of him. This was not a man. This was a force of nature. An alpha of alphas. Cale. He stopped a dozen feet away, his silver eyes sweeping over Julian, taking in his worn clothes, the tremor in his hands, the defiant terror in his gaze. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cold control. Julian's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was it. The confrontation he had both dreaded and, in his darkest moments, craved. "You have been difficult to find," Cale said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, as calm and chilling as his scent. It held no overt threat, yet it vibrated with an authority that demanded submission. Julian pressed himself harder against the wall, lifting his chin in a useless show of defiance. "What do you want?" he rasped, his own voice sounding thin and weak. Cale's gaze was unervingly perceptive. It lingered for a moment on the frantic pulse in Julian's throat before dropping, slowly, deliberately, to the slight swell of his stomach hidden beneath the hoodie. A flicker of something, surprise? No, not surprise. Confirmation passed through those silver depths. The alpha's nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. Of course, he could smell it. He could smell the pup. His pup. The air in the alley thickened, Cale's scent intensifying, becoming possessive, proprietary. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound so deep Julian felt it in his bones. It wasn't directed at him. It was a warning to the world. A claim. "My father's men are here," Julian said, the words tumbling out in a rush of desperate strategy. "They're hunting me. They'll kill you on sight. He was trying to scare him off, to make him leave. But Cale didn't even blink. I am aware, he said, his voice dropping even lower. I have been tracking them for 2 days. They are the only reason I was able to find you. The implication hung in the air between them. Cale hadn't been hunting Julian. He had been hunting Julian's hunters. The world tilted on its axis. Nothing made sense. This was the monster who had ruined him, the brute who had taken everything. Why would he protect him? Cale took a step closer, and Julian flinched, a pathetic whimper escaping his lips. Cale froze instantly, a strange, conflicted look crossing his face. It might have been pain, or regret. I will not harm you, Julian, he said, his voice softer now, though no less powerful. I never intended to. You marked me. Julian spat, the accusation raw and bleeding. You forced a bond on me, I know, Cale said, and for the first time, the granite mask cracked, revealing a fissure of genuine remorse. In the chaos, your scent, you were unmated. My instincts, they overwhelmed me. It was not my intention, but it is my responsibility. He took another slow, deliberate step. They will not take you. And they will not touch what is mine. His gaze dropped to Julian's stomach again, the possessiveness in his eyes absolute, terrifying, and protective. A wave of dizziness washed over Julian. The stress, the shock, the overwhelming proximity of the alpha whose mark burned on his skin, it was all too much. The edges of his vision began to gray. His knees buckled. Before he could hit the filthy ground, Cale closed the distance in a silent, impossible rush. Strong arms enveloped him, pulling him against a chest as hard as iron. Julian's head swam with the undiluted scent of pine and storm. It should have been terrifying. It should have felt like a cage. But as darkness claimed him, the last thing his fractured consciousness registered was a primal, deeply buried sense of safety, of coming home. He woke to the scent of clean linen and antiseptic. He was lying in a bed, the sheets soft against his skin. The room was minimalist and modern, all cool grays and dark wood. A wall of glass looked out over the city, the lights a glittering tapestry against the night sky. He was high up, far above the filth and noise. He sat up slowly, his head aching. He was wearing a soft, gray t-shirt that was far too large for him, its collar hanging loose around his neck, exposing the scarred bite mark on his shoulder. The scent of the alpha, Cale, clung to the fabric, a constant, overwhelming presence. You're awake, Julian's head snapped toward the voice. Cale was standing by the window, a silhouette against the city lights. He turned, and Julian's breath caught. In the soft light of the room, he looked less like a monster and more like a man burdened by the weight of a crown. Where am I? Julian asked, his voice hoarse. He pulled the sheet up to his chin, a futile gesture of defense. My penthouse. A safe house. Your father's men won't find you here. Why? The question was sharp, desperate. Why are you doing this? Cale moved away from the window, coming to stand at the foot of the bed. He kept his distance, a deliberate act of consideration that Julian found more unsettling than outright aggression. The attack on your wedding was not random, Cale began, his voice even and measured. Your father and the Varden Patriarch were finalizing an alliance that would have given them the power to purge all the smaller, independent packs in the region. My pack included. They were consolidating power, and their methods were brutal. Julian stared, his mind reeling. His father, a tyrant? He'd always known the man was ruthless. But this. Robert Varden was no innocent groom. Cale continued, his silver eyes holding Julian's. He was his father's right hand, as cruel as he was ambitious. Stopping that union was necessary to prevent a war that would have slaughtered thousands, so you slaughtered them instead. Julian countered, bitterness lacing his tone. My orders were to neutralize their leadership and scatter their forces. To show them their treaty was worthless, Cale said, a muscle tightening in his jaw. The deaths were regrettable, but necessary. I saw you in the chaos. Your father was using you, Julian. A bargaining chip. When the fighting started, he and his guards abandoned you without a second thought. The words were a physical blow. Julian remembered the terror of that moment, of being left alone as the world exploded around him. He had thought. He had assumed. But Cale's words rang with a cold, hard truth. And the mark? Julian whispered, his hand rising to touch the scarred flesh of his shoulder. What about the mark? Kale looked away for the first time, his gaze fixed on the cityscape. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion Julian couldn't name. That was not part of the plan. You are a true Omega. Rare. Powerful. In the middle of the fight, with my wolf at the surface, your scent was a beacon. You were unmated, unclaimed, and in danger. My alpha instincts, they saw a mate. And they acted. He turned back, his expression stark. There is no excuse. I claimed you without your consent. I tied you to me, and for that, I am sorry. But I will not apologize for saving you from your father. And I will not allow him to take you back. They existed in a state of tense truce for the next week. Julian was a prisoner in a gilded cage, but a cage Kale never locked. He had the run of the sprawling penthouse, with its sterile luxury and breathtaking views. Kale provided him with food, with clothes, with a quiet, unobtrusive presence. He worked mostly from an office down the hall, the low murmur of his voice on calls a constant background hum. He never crowded Julian, never pushed him. He would simply leave meals outside his door, his scent a faint, lingering question mark in the air. Julian spent his days reading from Kale's extensive library, the silence a welcome balm after months of city noise. But it was a fragile piece. The bond between them was a living thing, strengthening with proximity. When Kale was near, the mark on Julian's neck would tingle, a low, pleasant warmth spreading through his veins. He could feel the alpha's moods, the ironclad control when he was on a call, the flicker of concern when Julian skipped a meal, the deep, possessive satisfaction that rolled off him whenever he was in the same room as Julian and their unborn child. It was this that terrified Julian the most, the slow, insidious erosion of his anger. This Kale, the quiet, respectful guardian, was so at odds with the violent monster of his memories. He was seeing the man, the alpha, and his body, his omega instincts, were responding with a sense of rightness that his mind rebelled against. One evening, unable to sleep, Julian padded into the main living area. He found Kale standing by the window wall, staring down at the river of lights below. I can't feel them anymore, Julian said softly. My father's men. Kale turned. He wasn't wearing his usual severe suit jacket, just a black shirt that strained across his broad shoulders. They have been dealt with, he said simply. Dealt with. They are no longer a threat to you. The finality in his tone sent a shiver down Julian's spine. He understood the unspoken meaning. They were dead. The alpha had eliminated the threat to his mate and his pup. A part of him should have been horrified, but the overwhelming emotion that washed over him was relief. A profound, soul-deep relief that left him weak. Thank you, he whispered, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. Kale's silver eyes softened. He took a hesitant step toward Julian. He will not stop, Kale said. Your father. He knows you carry a potential heir. An heir of my bloodline. He will see the pup as a weapon or a threat. He will never leave you in peace. So what happens now? Julian asked, his voice trembling slightly. I stay your prisoner. You are not my prisoner, Kale said, his voice firm. You are under my protection. You are my mate. He said the word with a reverence that made Julian's heart ache. And this is our territory. I will allow no one to harm you here. He was closer now, close enough that Julian could feel the heat radiating from his body. The scent of pine and storm wrapped around him like a blanket. Instinct, deep and undeniable, urged him to lean into that warmth, to seek that shelter. He took a shaky breath, his resolve crumbling. He was so tired of being alone, so tired of being afraid. He looked up at the powerful alpha, at the man who had simultaneously destroyed and saved his life. And for the first time, he didn't see a monster. He saw a lonely, burdened leader who had found the one thing his soul recognized as its own. He saw his mate. The attack came without warning. A concussive blast blew the window wall inward, showering the penthouse in a cascade of glittering glass. Julian screamed, instinctively curling around his stomach as the force threw him to the floor. Alarms blared, a jarring, electronic shriek. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Kale roar, a sound of pure, untamed fury that was not human. Before Julian could even process what was happening, Kale was a blur of motion, shielding Julian's body with his own as debris rained down around them. Stay behind me, he commanded, his voice a low, feral snarl. Men in black tactical gear were rappelling through the shattered opening, weapons raised. Julian recognized the insignia on their armor, his father's crest. A wave of cold dread washed over him. He had brought this danger into Cale's home. He had put him at risk. Cale met the first two intruders with brutal efficiency. He moved with a speed and grace that was inhuman, a whirlwind of controlled violence. There was no hesitation, no mercy. He was an alpha protecting his territory. But there were too many of them. They were pouring in, fanning out, their movements disciplined and precise. This wasn't just a squad of enforcers. This was an elite kill team. A gunshot rang out, and Cale grunted, stumbling back a step. A dark stain blossomed on his side. Silver. They were using silver rounds. Julian's fear instantly transmuted into a white-hot rage. They had hurt him. They had hurt his alpha. Something inside him snapped. The carefully constructed dam of control he had maintained for years, the persona of the meek, gentle Omega, it shattered. A power he had kept hidden his entire life, a secret shame his father had beaten into him, surged to the surface. The air around him crackled with energy. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness, save for the emergency strobes and the distant city glow. A low growl escaped Julian's throat, a sound he hadn't known he could make. The intruders paused, their night vision goggles sweeping the room. "Find the Omega," one of them shouted. "The Lord wants him alive." But the Omega they were looking for was gone. Cale, leaning against a pillar and clutching his side, watched in stunned disbelief as the air around Julian began to shimmer. His eyes, no longer the soft brown of his human form, now glowed with an ethereal, pale blue light. The shadows in the room deepened, coalescing, twisting into unnatural shapes at Julian's command. He was not just an Omega. He was a lumen, a shadow weaver, a bloodline thought to be extinct, a creature of immense and terrifying power. "You will not touch him," Julian's voice echoed in the darkness, layered and resonant, the voice of a being far older and more dangerous than the boy he appeared to be. The shadows lashed out like sentient whips, disarming the soldiers, wrapping around their limbs, their throats, constricting with silent, inexorable force. They fell without a sound, puppets with their strings cut. In moments, it was over. The penthouse was silent again, save for the whistling of the wind through the broken window. Julian stood in the center of the room, the pale blue light in his eyes slowly fading, the shadows receding. He was breathing heavily, his body trembling with the backlash of using his power. He looked at Cale, at the blood seeping through his fingers, and his carefully constructed fury dissolved back into fear. He rushed to his side. "You're hurt, Julian." Cale breathed, his silver eyes wide with awe and something deeper. "Reverence. Your power." "I was taught to hide it," Julian whispered, tearing a strip of fabric from his shirt to press against the wound. "My father was terrified of it. He said it was a curse. It is a gift," Cale said, his hand coming up to cup Julian's cheek. His touch was warm, steady. "You are magnificent." He looked from Julian's face to the unconscious soldiers, and then back again. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. "It seems my mate is more than capable of protecting our territory." The shared danger, the revelation of his secret, it had broken down the last of Julian's walls. Here, in the ruins of the penthouse, covered in dust and blood, everything was stripped bare. There was only the truth, the undeniable pull of the bond, the fierce, protective love he felt for the alpha bleeding beside him, the life they had created, growing safe within him. He leaned in, pressing his forehead against Cale's. The scent of pine and ozone and Cale's own unique scent filled him, calming the frantic beating of his heart. It was the scent of safety, the scent of home. "We have to go," Cale murmured, his voice tight with pain. "Your father won't stop with this. He's declared war." Julian pulled back, his eyes meeting Cale's. There was no fear in his gaze now, only a cold, hard resolve. He was done hiding. He was done being a victim. He was a lumen. He was a mate. He was a mother-to-be. And he would fight to protect his new family. "Let him come," Julian said, his voice quiet but ringing with newfound power. "This time, we'll be ready for him." Cale's hand moved from his cheek to the back of his neck, his thumb stroking the scarred mark he had placed there. It no longer felt like a brand of ownership, but a promise, a symbol of their shared strength. He leaned in and captured Julian's lips in a kiss that was both gentle and fiercely possessive, a sealing of their pact. It tasted of blood, of ozone, and of a future they would have to fight for. But looking into his alpha's silver eyes, Julian knew, with absolute certainty, that he was no longer alone. And they would win.